actually credit what
Yep.
we're paying right now for this interim report. Right, and so even if if this report, like I said, says, nah, you don't need to do one, if that's their technical conclusion, it wouldn't mean that we wouldn't have to.
Well, and that's kind of
your decision is a two-step. First of all, is this a project? Will your decision, is it discretionary? Yes, it is. Will it has a physical effect on the environment? So is it a project? Yes or no? They will be making a recommendation as to whether or not it's a project, and if so, then you are compelled to follow CEQA. Following CEQA does not necessarily mean they need to do an EIR. Is there an exemption? If there's no exemption that applies, can you do this by negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration? Are there a set of mitigations that can be proposed that would therefore not have a significant effect on the environment? And if the answers to both those are,
or
this is going to help. You need to supplement.
allotments, as long as the project's going to finish after the new water supply comes online. That would give some clarity to the jurisdictions to begin trying to permit things locally. May still bump heads with the CDO at the state level. And every time we had this discussion for the past 3.5 years, waiting to have that project, water supply project approval, your council would say, we're going to need an EIR. And your GM would say, we're not going to need an EIR. So this is kind of a smaller interim step to figure out if we really do need the EIR or what. So.
Another question. I'm just wondering, as we look at this, is it a good idea or a bad idea to look at the numbers that are going to be put forward, the RENA numbers essentially, and look at the different jurisdictions and the amount of housing for which they are going to be responsible for that overall number, and make the determination, the allocations based on those percentages?
I don't think that that level of review is necessary for this purpose. And that's going to be the horse trading. Hopefully it goes smoothly as we discuss it, Chair, Vice Chair, but I don't think we'll be at a point where we even have suggested numbers for 6 months. Well, we have suggested numbers, but we won't have the feedback of the jurisdictions, whether they're acceptable for 5 or 6 months.
But if we don't pay attention to what those numbers are and it doesn't match up with the water allocations, what's the point?
Right. But I think that those are two separate issues. Whether the allocation itself is a project and needs CEQA is going to be different than what's the formula for the allocation. And that process is the allocation process. So that's going to be what we talked about with the representative of every city and the airport and so forth, sitting at the table, agreeing on a formulaic approach.
Right.
And those formulas have to address both the housing need or population growth and commercial growth. And there'll be parallel but separate tracks, because you're going to need, we're going to go first to the planners and the city managers, and then up to the mayoral level and the policy advisory committee.
Okay, I'm worried that maybe I've gotten us outside the rails of what this item actually is.
This is.
So let me see if there's, yes, Mr.
Mr. Because the real issue is, we definitely don't want to be saying, well, we're going to help you either meet your arena numbers or not by giving you water, then ergo, that's what we're trying to stay away from. But anyway, like the general manager said, is the arena is 8 years, but we're going to talk about making sure you have enough water every 5 years. So that's why they don't line up, right? But I wanted to get just to the district council about having the memo. Does it, anybody that may want to challenge, and I won't go too far down, right? But anybody that may want to challenge, does it make it harder for them to challenge because we have something in writing that says, hey, we reviewed it. And I know the decision, the EIR decision, yes or no, is really the point there. But I'm saying, is it helpful to?
I believe having this documentation before you ultimately need to be making the decision. You are exercising your discretion as to whether it's a project. And if you decide that it is a project, then how to address this under sequence. That will stop with you first. And then the question is, have you exercised your discretion reasonably, and how have you informed that? So I think having this type of documentation before you will help inform that decision that you have to make.
And I think it does go to, if somebody were thinking of challenging and they see that you've already analyzed it, they'll either back off or, it'll help the court with a decision of their own.
But it's not a get out of jail free card. Ultimately, there's going to be an exercise of discretion.
Any other board members with questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you. So if I understood the way you were talking about the allocation process when we get there, it wouldn't, the jurisdictions will make their decisions about housing and development, arena numbers, all of that, regardless of, they're not going to be made, the allocation will not be a factor in those decisions. Is that?
Well, how much water that gets allocated will need to be related to what each city thinks its needs are, which is then directly going straight to arena number and a economic growth forecast or concept. So they will bear a relation. I think one of the problems we have is we have some cities that recognize that RENA is a planning process and that developers may not develop and the cities themselves don't have the resources to develop, and it could be a 20 to 30 year build out.
Mm-hmm.
And then other cities want to do it all as soon as possible and actually try to meet the 8-year RENA cycle as if that's a target number. And so some folks are going to say, I want it all now, give me my water. And others are going to say, realistically, we don't need it, but no one's ever going to say we don't need water. We've experienced that one before. Our goal, I think, is to propose, here's enough water for all of you cities to do what you need to do in the next 10 years and get buy-in on that and say, we're not going to give you 100%. And I use this analogy, and this isn't to single out Carmel, but they already have the drumbeats of opposing their number, and it's a very small number going. And so if we give them all the water you need for your number, and heck, Seaside and Monterey will come in and build more housing than that and not be anywhere close to their number, then that could go unused. Another jurisdiction could say, we already did our 400 or we did our 600 and we're getting ready for our next, and give me more water at that point. So we want to be able to be in a position to say, here's enough to get started, and then look and see who's actually successfully building the housing. And again, this isn't all about housing. People don't want to live here unless they have jobs, unless I suppose you're retired and wealthy, but so there's got to be job growth. There's got to be economic development. And so it's a combination of those two. And we don't want to unfairly hamper cities from reaching their economic goals. There is going to be some discussion about whether we should be completely laissez-faire and let the cities determine the mix between housing and the different types of housing and business. Or if, as we talked about earlier today, if we make it a rule that you have to have an adopted housing element before you even get your allocation. Or if we go further and we say, well, you've adopted a housing element that includes very low income and low income. So here's your allocation, but there's a sub account that's 20% is reserved only for very low and low housing to assist you in your RENA goals. That's something that you as a board and then the policy advisory committee as a, you know, as a buyer into our proposal are probably going to end up talking about, you know, who should control the water. We can't just completely lay out the land use planning because that's how this agency got in trouble in the early 2000s. But there may be things that we can do that are both carrot and stick to make sure that some consideration is given to following through on the housing elements. So, but that's, so our staff will sit down with city and county staff and then the 3 military units and the airport. That's the group. We will have a proposal on how to allocate. There'll be a lot of discussion, but once we seem to be close, then it gets kicked up to the policy advisory committee, which is the mayors and the county representatives. So.
Okay,
How long will this project take?
So this should, we're hopeful, 6 to 8 weeks, and we'll be starting the allocation process even while this is going on. Not the least of which is trying to confirm with the Army. You may have seen like Naval Postgraduate School has a new innovation center, but we also have to kind of ferret out what other just basic things they want to build. There has been a list. They usually have trouble getting funding and then it falls over to another 3-year cycle and so forth. But
yes, Mr.
Thank you, Chair. Jim, could you lay out a timetable or timeline on this process at our next board meeting, not this one coming up, but the next one with the PAC and the TAC, and just lay it out because I think the public will really need to hear this. And I think we're gonna have to put you on the stump again to tell people, like the mayor's group, the councils and stuff, what is happening with this, so everybody, because I got a feeling somebody, the EIR probably is the best way to go, but we got so many EIRs we're looking at, and we're looking at supply and demand too. So just make it clear that we're looking at all this stuff to everyone. So
yeah, I'd love to.
Good, that's a good
We talked
idea.
about it, Chair, Vice Chair. We really have a sense, a feeling that we're now into another level by signing the agreement. We're now building that project, or we will, starting August. And we have a 2-year window to completion. And so there's things we want done within 1 year.
Right.
And there's things we want done by the end of the build, which is 2 years. And they're different things. I mean, we're talking about trying to lift the CDO, preferably with the assistance of CalAM. We've broached the subject with the state board. If we don't have their help, what do we do? So there's these 2 parallel processes, which is the CDO and the allocation, so that we're ready to go when they flip that switch and there's new water. But I don't want to just keep
That's not
yakking
where
because
we
we're
are
here for
today.
budget.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any member of the public who would like to make comments on this item today? Thank you so much. Let's bring it back to the board then. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve this action.
I move that we approve this action item.
Thank you very much. Is there a second? Excellent. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstains? Okay, great. With that, we will close action item number 1 and move over to action item number 2. And again, by our David Stolt, General Manager. And I think Suresh
Yeah, we'll
Suresh
pick
is doing this one
Suresh.
as well.
I know we did talk about the subject without taking any action previously, so this is the action.
We did talk about this subject 8-year budget session back in March. Informally, we did, and let's say that we were going to balance the mid-year budget by showing that we are going to pay off the Kenny's Bank loan. So that's where we are here tonight. In April 2013, the board MPWMD board did authorize an installment purchase agreement with Mechanics Bank that was formerly Revival Bank at that time in the amount of $4 million. Proceeds were going to be used towards the funding of the ASR project.
Is your mic on?
There you go. Do I have to restart or I can just continue?
Go ahead.
So the funds were used to construct the ASR facility and also reimburse the district for the reserve fund that had been used to fund some of the pre-ASR costs. So that's what that $4 million proceed was used for. At that time, the loan term was 10 years, amortized over 30 years. The interest rate at that time was 3.6%, and the balloon payment maturity date was set at June 30th, 2023, which is going to be next month. We did look at refinancing that loan. There are two problems with that. One of them is the interest rate. Today's market offers a 6.5% interest rate to refinance that loan. The other big critical component to this is the uncertainty of the water supply charge. Due to pending lawsuit, the litigation we have on our hands, we are not able to pledge the water supply charge revenue against any kind of loan. And so we are not able to do that. So those are the two factors that's affecting refinancing this loan. The other option was just to pay it off. And basically that's the best option we can do is pay off this loan. As of June 5th, the payoff amount is $2,135,000. We are asking for a not to exceed $2,140,000. I'm having a little buffer in there just in case if there's any administrative fee or anything by the bank, then we are all covered by that. But it should be close to $2,135,000. When we balanced the mid-year budget, we did include $2,150,000 in the budget. So we did balance the budget. We do have funds to pay this loan off. And so that's what we are here tonight is asking the board authorize staff to go ahead and pay off this loan.
Great. Thank you very much for that presentation. Is there any member of the board that wishes to ask questions or make comments? Mr. Riley.
I would just like to add that we've been paying down the balance for the last, 2 years, maybe 3?
2 years.
$500,000 a year for a while. I'm just glad we were doing that. Make this work out a little better.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Laredo, was paying this loan off, would it affect our appeal that we're doing to the next court on this item?
Technically, no. The facts that were before the Superior Court are locked in stone. The appeal will be to examine the judgment that was rendered by the Superior Court based upon the facts that were before that.
Okay, so the case will go on and it is left up to the judge to throw out what needs to be thrown out, but we're not
direction-
saying that we paid everybody, we paid them off, we don't need the money. I think we need to pay ourselves back somehow.
Well, your direction was to file an appeal. The notice of appeal was in fact lodged this morning with the court. But I'll remind you that the connection charge, I'm sorry, the water supply charge has more purposes than just to repay this loan. It is to fund water supply efforts, and there are a wide variety of water supply efforts that are before you, and those are not fully funded at this point.
Okay, thank you. That's why I want to know. And we will go over this again at the budget meeting, that we letting everybody know that what we're doing, we're trying to keep it clear and transparent, that we're not doing anything behind anybody's back. That's my point. So
It's the purpose of having it as an item tonight.
thank you. Yes.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Mr. Eisenhart.
Just a real quick question. District Council, can you help us understand in the public that the perfecting of the appeal, which in my experience will be roughly 18 to 24 months long with our 6th District Court of Appeal. has what effect, if any, on the water supply charges for that period of time?
I agree with your assessment. It will be no sooner than 12, more likely 18 months, and could go even longer. During that time, there is not an order of the Superior Court that affects the collection. The charge it is on your books, and as long as you submit that to the tax roll, then it will be collected. What you do with the funds then is your discretion. If you chose to expend them and it was determined that the collection should be terminated, then you would have a question as to whether or not there's going to be a refund.
So what would to follow up, what's the effect of the stay? The appellate stays the judgment pending the appeal. And so since it's stayed and there's no injunction.
So we're going to put it on the assessor's roll. We will collect it, but you'll learn in the next item during the budget workshop what our plans for that are, which is collect it, bank it, and not direct it to any place.
Which is a separate issue, but I just
Yes.
want the public and everybody to understand that the effect of the appellate stay is the charges will continue. The
And
water
it could
supply.
be 2 cycles at
So-
2 years
And
worth.
the stay does not affect the district
Again-
itself. The stay affects the Superior Court order.
Yes, I think I'd like to stay to the question that we have at hand, which is whether we are going to consider approving an expenditure of funds to pay off the remaining balance of the Mechanics Bank loan.
That's a good idea because you'll learn more about it during the budget.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Mayor?
I was gonna say something similar. It's just, we have the money. It's a good idea to pay your debts. Getting into where the money comes from at this time is not really appropriate. But so I support us paying our debts, and particularly if it's a suggestion from the general manager that we have the money to do so.
Thank you. And I always like the idea of not increasing the amount that one has to pay for interest. So if we're able to pay it off, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, it's a really good thing for the district. It's good for lots of reasons to pay this debt, and reduce our debt payments. And it's when, we think ahead several years, it's really good. And I just want to thank our general manager and Suresh for figuring this out, figuring out a budget that where we can do this reasonably. It's very helpful.
Okay. Thank you very much. Could we go out and see if there's any member of the public who wishes to speak to this item?
Chair Adams, I see no raised hands.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I'll bring it back to the board for action. Is there a motion to move to consider to approve the expenditure of funds to pay off the remaining balance on Mechanics Bank loan?
I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you very much. So we have a first by Paul, a second by Riley. Could you, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Okay, it passes 5-0. Moving on.
Seven.
Oh, 7, sorry, wrong.
Before we get into item B, discussion item, I do want to point out that when Suresh and I got here, Suresh got here about 3 months before I did. We finished that fiscal year with about $300,000 of reserves. We were that close to zero. And now we're at the point where we can happily say, oh, let's pay off 2.1 million, and it's not going to affect the financial health of the district. So
Thanks to you.
thanks to the cash hoarder over there.
Well, let's move forward with our discussion item then.
Thankfully.
Thank you very much. And so tonight, now we're going to review the proposed Monterey Peninsula Water Management District fiscal year 23-24 budget and resolution 23-07. And I think it will be Suresh who does the presentation tonight.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the board. So we are here tonight to review the proposed fiscal year 23-24 budget. I have a brief PowerPoint, solid brief, but it's about 25 or 28 slides. And by the way, I like the new name, cash hoarder. Next slide, Joel. So the staff note that was sent out with the board packet, it has the full budget in detail. And these are the table of contents is shown on the slides here. Basically, it's got the resolution, the draft resolution, transmittal letter. We have a vision mission statement. We also have a decade of water supply projects. That page will be updated with the June budget packet that we send out. That's still a 22-23 report. We were just working on that, and I think we've got the final version right before the meeting, but we'll have that included with the June budget. Then we have expenditures, different types of expenditures by fund, comparative expenses, and also the expenses by division, and those are from pages 10 through 14. Project expenditures are from pages 15 through 18. Then we have the 3-year capital improvement plan, that's on page 19 of the actual packet. And then we have the capital asset purchases. We also have what's called the capital asset replacement schedule. That's basically showing all of the assets, capital assets for the district that's owned by the district. And we have a timeline as to when those assets need to be replaced. And so basically it also shows how the monies are being accrued for those assets. So that's when you see the capital reserve number that we set aside every year, that's basically being driven from that capital asset replacement schedule. The revenues, again, comparative by fund, and then a chart that's on pages 22 through 24. Reimbursements, all of the reimbursement revenue that's received by the district, that's on page 25. We have the reserve analysis, page 26 and 27. We have the district org chart on page 28, and then the division budget, which basically shows each individual division, the 5 divisions we have, and then also shows their budget for the last 3 years, including the one that's being proposed. So it's kind of like for comparative purposes, you can see where division numbers are. We have a budget calendar on page 39, and then the glossary, which are some terms that's used in this budget book, that's on pages 40 through 42. So with that, I'll draw your attention to the budget calendar. Budget request was sent out beginning of May. We did get the submittal back from the divisions on May 12th. Team management, which includes all the division managers plus the general manager, they did review the budget on May 16. We made some trimming and basically balancing at that meeting. And then here we are tonight at the budget workshop. And then the budget is proposed to be adopted on June 19. That's the budget adoption date. Oh, has it been moved to 20th? Okay, 20th. Board adopted strategy back in 2004. This board did adopt a strategy that said develop annual balanced budgets. And it said to preserve all the existing services, enable the district to carry out its mission and vision. Also, to maintain at that time, it was maintain a 5% general operating reserve, but it said to replenish it to about 50% within 5 years. So, but this was back in 2004. Here we are in 2023. If we take the general operating reserve and compare it, the percentage basis, it's at 81% for this fiscal year 23-24. So we've definitely maintained all of those strategy. 23-24, we were mindful of the current status of district's funding sources. We still are, with the expense side, we are still holding with the COVID-19 exposure, basically logistics, freights, all those things are still being high out there. Materials are not being delivered on time. Good example would be vehicles. We're still waiting for our second and third vehicle, which we ordered about 6 months ago, I believe, or something. So things are still not back to pre-COVID level. So there are things that still being hurt through the COVID-19 exposure. So we were mindful of that as being the current status on the district's funding sources. Also, the big one was the water supply charge, and we'll talk more about that one. We were mindful of the impact of that, and that has been evaluated and also included in this budget. And I'll show you how we've factored that and how we've made that part of this budget. The original division requests submitted were reviewed and adjustments were made, as I had mentioned, during the team management budget process. The format of the budget is same as what we've maintained over the last few years. So there wasn't much change to the format itself. And then, of course, the pending litigation on water supply charge impact, that's included in this budget. Just like to mention that despite our efforts and strategy for the 2004 develop balanced budget, there were some years that we were not able to balance the budgets, and that was due to the PWM project, Pure Water Monterey project. We had some huge expenditures related to that project, so we were unable to do it. 23-24 budget does include use of reserves, but it's basically the carry forward number. And what carry forward number basically is prior authorized projects in last fiscal year that have not been closed out. So basically there are some pending expenses out there. What happens at the end of the fiscal year, we close out the books, the money that's not spent goes into the general fund. And so what happens is when you go to the next fiscal year, those budget amounts are carried over into the next cycle. And so then basically they are funded with a carryover amount. So they were already pre-authorized. It's just that they were not able to close out the projects on time, meaning not completed on time. General reserve balance, it's actually, so it's $18.4 million or 81% of the operating budget. 23-24 budget is a lot higher. It's about $48 million. It's about 65% higher than 22-23 budget. And that's primarily due to one project only, which is the PWM expansion. That alone is like an $18 million project, but that's funded by grants. So that's why the number is high, but that's because it's considered as a reimbursement project. And when we compare the district revenues and the reimbursements, you'll see where those numbers are. On the district side of it, district revenues like water supply, user fee, property tax, connection charge, interest, all those are relatively in line with previous years. But when you get to reimbursements, those are basically, it's whatever happens in that fiscal year, that's what the numbers are. So this year we have that $18 million.
Yeah, and for clarification on Pure Water Monterey expansion, that's our portion of it. So we don't have the final bids in, so we don't really know what it's going to cost, but we have authorization for $77 million under the WIFIA loan program, the EPA's loan program. And you may recall that collectively with Monterey One, we've been awarded $42 million of grants. So if it was the max amount minus the $42 million, you'd be looking at $35 million of total out-of-pocket costs. That's going to be on the books of Monterey One Water. But because we're the recipient of 18 million plus of the grant monies, that comes in as a revenue and goes out as an expense. So we're just carrying 18 million of the project costs, which, so it's a full up from 30 million of otherwise what it would have been.
Just real quick on the subjects. Yeah, so this particular reimbursement project, the budget is essentially identical to the grant.
Correct.
That's all I needed to know.
Yeah, net effect zero.
I'm sorry?
Is there any administrative fee that we receive from the grant?
No. So unlike IRWM, where we get administrative monies before we send the money out to Monterey and elsewhere, there's none in here. There's actually administrative fees that are held back by California Department of Water Resources on their grant. I don't think there's anything held back from the governor's earmark because it's being processed through the state Water Resources Control Board.
Okay, Mr. Riley?
I just question on procedure, but should we hold our questions until you're finished with your presentation? Because as
We
you
could get in.
present, then things start to churn, and then do you want to be interrupted, or how do you want to do this?
What is the timing on your presentation?
Maybe hold it off to the
I think
end.
that's a good
Yeah.
idea as well.
And
So
then we
just
can go back.
write down your questions and we'll
Okay.
come
If
back.
there's any reference to the slides, we can always bring the slides back up.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Chair, I still want to know what the time is. I thought it was a good question you asked.
Yeah, it should be about
About
25,
15, 20 minutes.
yeah, 15,
Okay.
20.
So we have a full year of user fee revenues included in the proposed budget, and that's based on estimates of CalAm collection of water revenues. We will continue to monitor the collections throughout the year. And if there's any adjustments, that will be brought through the mid-year budget process, but we got a fairly good handle on that. We do have a full year of water supply charge included in this proposed budget. What we've done is also set aside that revenue that's being collected through water supply charge in its entirety in a reserve fund. And that's again due to pending litigation. So basically you have the revenue coming in just like a pass through, and then we show that that money goes to a reserve fund and is held in the reserve fund. So as the council said, if we ever had to, let's just say if we are not successful with the appeal process, and if we had to refund it, that's where the money is going to be, is sitting in the reserve fund. So we're not using any dime from the water supply charge for this current budget. Full year of property tax revenue, full year of PWM water sales revenue. And again, that's a pass through, money coming in, that we're buying the water at the same rate. So that's also a pass through. And then we will continue to monitor and make adjustments during mid-year for any of these revenue sections that we feel needs adjustments. So we continuously monitor those. We continue to outsource the following services. The information technologies outsource, GIS system, that's outsourced. And then of course the public outreach. Some of the large budget expenditures, some ASR site work, that's going to be about $197,000. That's included in this budget. The operation of the ASR phase 1, that's $591,000 and change. That's funded by CalAm ratepayers, so that's refunded by, reimbursed by CalAm ratepayers. We have some permit work on the 2808B, about $120,000. We have the PWM, and then MPWSP model work, about $118,000. We have set aside about $100,000 for the water allocation process. On the PWM project side, we have the operating reserve about $759,000. We have the PWM water purchase. So that's basically, I was showing the revenue. And this is the expense for the water purchase itself. Expansion cost, this is what we were talking about, the reimbursement coming in from the grant, the $16.8 million. So that's what that line item is. The Monterey Water System Measure J work, we have budgeted $400,000 for this upcoming budget. The update of the Seaside Basin model, $55,000, and then of course local water project about $50,000. The fish rearing facility related fish rescue activities about $547,000. Riparian erosion activities about $100,000. And then hydrologic monitoring work, about $163,000. And these are all recorded stuff that's fairly in line with prior fiscal years. The completion of the design, construction of the channel and quarantine tank at Sleepy Hollow, $126,000. All will not be spent. IRWM project, $2.2 million, but that's all grant funded. So that's money coming in, money going out. Conservation related activities, $411,000, and then water conservation rebates paid for by CalAm ratepayers, $400,000. So all in all, project cost, when you compare the project cost, $36 million, that includes the $2.2 million for the IRWM grant and $16 million for the expansion project. That's about 93% over prior year, just comparatively. When you look at the personal cost for the budget, it's $4.4 million, just a slight decrease, about minus 0.04% over prior fiscal year. Service and supplies budget, $1.8 million, and that's about 4% increase over prior fiscal year. Legal expenses, the same as last fiscal year, although we may have to come back and adjust that during mid-year process, depending on where we are with the Measure J and all that, on water supply charge. Contingency at $70,000. Debt service payment, I had to show that as zero because the prior action by this board basically paid that loan off. And so there'll be no $230,000 on the debt service. So that's actually helpful to the budget. And then fixed asset purchase, these are all pretty much carry over budget from last fiscal year, $230,000. There's some trucks and computers and I think backup generator stuff. So there's a detailed page on that. We setting aside on the general reserve side, $1.3 million, pension reserve, $100,000, OPEB reserve, $100,000, and then capital reserve. So that's basically the renewal and replacement schedule I was talking about. So that's setting aside $330,000. And then of course the water supply reserve fund, that's $3.4 million set aside. So these are all the reserves that we're going to be setting aside. The $1.3 million on the general reserve, we'll talk more about that when I get to the revenue side in terms of usage. Because what we have is we have cost centers. We have Fund 24, which is mitigation, Fund 35, which is water supply, and Fund 26, which is conservation. So we have to balance all the funds. In general, the budget is balanced. We have a surplus of about 600,000. But when you look at each individual fund, mitigation has more surplus and water supply charge has a deficit. So you basically put it in, take it out from one fund to the other.
And point of clarification, the water supply reserve. I'm sorry, clarification, the water supply reserve is our operating reserve that's contractually required for the Pure Water Monterey project. So we own the reserve and we carry it as an asset, but we have to increase it. So we'll be buying water.
No, that's not
That's-
that. That's not
so
the
which
water
one is
supply
that?
reserve. That's the water supply charge.
Oh, the reserve for the water supply charge. My bad. All right.
I will, yeah, I missed the word water supply charge. I missed the word charge. We will fix that. They'll clarify it, yeah, absolutely. Fixed asset purchases, we have computer upgrades, about 10,000, admin backup power system, about 70,000, site security, that's still a continuing project, and then vehicle replacements, there's 2 of them in there. So that was the 230,000 on the fixed assets. So looking at the expenditure summary in general, basically in a graphical format, helps understand where money is going. PWM water purchase, about 28% of the budget. Reimbursement projects, about 42% of the budget. Personnel cost, about 9% of the budget. And then there are some small pies out there, like project expenses, 6%, and then some other small ones.
And just keep in mind, we did request and have an earmark put forward by Senator Padilla. And so if we succeed, then the expenditures will go up by that, and so will the revenues. But it's about 2.2 million. Things like that, things like the FEMA reimbursement, that'll actually probably get accrued towards this year.
It is in the budget.
It is in the
It
budget.
is in the budget on the revenue side.
Even though we've already expended it, yes.
Yeah, the revenue is coming in this fiscal year, 23, 24. Yes. We're fairly, very close to getting it reimbursed, probably another 30 to 60 days out.
For the earmark, it's stormwater and dry weather flow diversions to pure water, so increasing source waters. There's a component in Monterey and there's a component in Seaside. Seaside is going to require a lengthy conversation with Jerry Dane, I think, but so we didn't completely resolve which ones are going to be ready to take money.
And when we're going to get that?
Probably not until August.
Are these the lakes that are Roberts Lakes and whatever the other one's called?
And because we're still in that mode where we don't have the new water, Seaside's first reaction was, well, how can we turn this commitment into water for ourselves?
I get it. I get it.
So looking at the revenue side, we have user fee about $6 million. There's the water supply charge, property tax, water sales, PWM water sales, capacity fee, permit fee, interest, and others. So the total district revenue is about $26.1 million. On the reimbursement side, we have the CALM reimbursement. That's the conservation rebates, and that's also the ASR operations cost reimbursed by CALM ratepayers. We have the grant, $18.9 million. That's the 2.2 for the IRWM and 16.8 for the PWM expansion. The other reimbursements, water reimbursement, water master reimbursement, reclamation project. We do recoup some of the admin costs on the reclamation project, Pebble Beach reclamation project. Legal recording reimbursements, and then there's the FEMA reimbursement, 165,000. So we are anticipating collection of that in 23-24. So the reimbursement revenue total was $20.2 million. So if you compare the numbers, district revenues, it's about 7% over prior year. That's $26.1 million, fairly in line. Reimbursements over prior year, so that's that $20 million number, and that's about 500% over. last fiscal year. And again, reimbursements, basically it is as it happens. Carry forward number, $886,000 was those carry forward number. Basically projects approved prior fiscal year did not get to fruition. Those numbers moved over into this fiscal year. Capital reserve, $100,000. That's basically, we are using that $100,000 to buy the 2 vehicles. So those money were accrued previously, and so now we're just pulling it back to buy the vehicles. And then the fund balance, we are using $949,000. So remember, I was talking about the $1.3 million setting aside as reserves, basically parking the money in there because mitigation fund had surplus. And so $949,000 comes out because a water supply charge fund had deficit. So that's why I said 1.3 goes in, $900,000 comes out. So what's the math? About $400,000 surplus.
And keep in mind the two probably loudest critiques you're going to get are, oh, you're becoming bloated. This is a huge budget. And so keep in mind that reimbursement increase is a one-time thing, and our actual budget's closer to 28 million, not 48 million. And then the second is every year we've been increasing the water sales from Pure Water Monterey and the deposits to the operating reserve at an increasing per acre foot water cost. And so you've now got this new revenue that's going in and a new expense that's coming in, but it does grow due to the inflation in chemicals, energy, and labor. But it's good to have that. I mean, that's what we set out to do, was get a water project. So
looking at the revenue summary on a graphical view, about 28% PWM water sales, some small numbers there. Then the other big one is the 40% of grants. The other big percent, 13% is the user fee. Then we have the water supply, 7%, and the 6% property tax. So that just helps with showing where the money's coming from. Looking at the sources and uses in totality, total expenses was 43, reserves amount to about 5.2, which turns out to be 48. On the revenue side, district revenues 26, reimbursements 20, and then the carry forward and reserve number is 1.9. So that turns out to be 48. So that's what we call the balanced budget part, is plug in numbers to show that the expenses equals to revenues, or the revenues equal to expenses. Just looking at a 5-year district history on revenue side, as Dave was saying, the purple bar is the PWM sales, water sales. So you can see that water sales number is just growing up. But again, that revenue is not something that we get to keep. That's just a pass through because we have been buying the water on the expense side. But other than that, if you look at the other charts, they're fairly constant over the last 5 years. So when critics talk about our budget, I mean, our budget on the operating side is fairly level. The same type of information on the expenditure side. And here you see the deep blue one, which is the PWM water purchase. And so basically, again, that's just matches the revenue side, whatever the cost is. And then the green bar is the project expenses. And so there are some years where we've had some big project expenses. And so that's why that line kind of like keeps going up.
Suresh, are our purchases of Pure Water Monterey water for the reserve in that same bar?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they're not quite the same size, the revenue bar and the expense bar.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. The reserve is out.
Okay, so the
number
reserve
out.
is,
Yes.
is separate. Okay,
Correct.
got it.
The analysis of reserves. So basically, we're estimating that we're going to be completing our fiscal year 23 with about $22 million in reserve, and estimating that, proposing that with the proposed budget, we're going to be ending 24 fiscal year with about $25 million. The biggest change there is just a $3.4 million on the water supply charge. Other than that, everything is fairly consistent. I mean, capital reserve goes up by a little bit, but that's because we're setting aside money every year. And then the operating reserve goes down a little bit. That's because we are pulling in the carry forward number, and we are pulling in the deficit for the water supply project. So it's just going down by about 500,000. Pension OPEB goes up by 200,000 because we are setting aside 100,000 every year. So at the very end, the footnote there, operating reserve ending balance, again, projected to be about 81% of the operating budget. Showing the analysis, the reserve.
Quickly back on the last chart. We've had some discussion about the flood drought reserve. We've learned more about what our deductible is from SDRMA, and I can't remember what it is.
It's 500,000.
500, yeah. So it might be wise to actually raise the flood drought reserve to 500,000. It's not currently proposed in this budget, but that is kind of our deductible for, flooding. Luckily, we kind of got covered by FEMA and OES with some help there. And then also notice the operating reserve is only dropping about $500,000 or a little bit more, 600,000, yet we're paying off the Mechanics Bank loan. So this was a very opportune time to do that.
Looking at the information in graphical view, basically general operating reserve about 70% of the total reserve. And now the water supply reserve is going to be, I'm calling it water supply charge reserve here. So I just missed it on that one slide. The water supply charge reserve is about 14%. And then some of the other ones, the flood drought, the debt, the pension. So some small numbers there, but that's what comprises of all of the reserves. I always like to show this, the district's future obligations commitments. We did have a conversation. The general manager and I had a conversation this morning. This chart will get updated. But for now, we've got the water allocation process, about 200,000, PWM water reserve, 1.9, pension obligation, about 3.5, OPEB obligation, about $5 million. You'll notice that we always used to carry, in the prior fiscal year, we used to carry Mechanics Bank, and now that's dropped off from here. But we have the reserve water from the expansion that needs to go in here, and there were some other expenses we were talking about that is out in the future there, but we'd like to bring it to the board's attention to say what the future obligations commitments are. So that's what the intention for this page is.
But this page may change when you see it in June.
In June.
Yeah.
So we want you to understand that. So unfunded pension.
There's many schools of thought, but our recommendation to this board has been, don't try to defease that obligation through what's called a sidecar financing, where you actually borrow what your obligation is and you make it go away. And then a year later, there's a mismatch between PERS discount rates and what you funded, and now you have a new obligation. But there are these things that are out there, and some agencies try to like to pay them down, but you just kind of need to know your exposure. And so in the past, we've shown water supply projects that we knew were coming. I think there's still some out there that aren't reflected here. So we're going to sharpen the pencil a little bit, but it's more like just keep in mind that if you had extra money, there are places you need to spend it.
So
my kids would do a different version of this chart. The priorities would be completely different.
So the recommendation tonight is the board discuss the fiscal year 23-24 budget, give staff general direction to staff. Again, no formal action is required at this meeting. And June 20th, I keep repeating the June 19th on all my slides, but June 20th is the board meeting to adopt the 23-24 budget. So that is all that I have.
Well, before I go to questions, I just want to say what a fantastic job you've done on this. And it's, aside from all of the numbers looking really good, just the clarity with which you explain it so that all of us can understand it is very much appreciated.
Thank you.
So with that, I will come to my colleagues and see if there's anyone who has any questions or comments on the budget. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Well, I agree about I'm very impressed with the quality of this. Well, first of all, you had challenges like the water supply charge, how to deal with that, the Mechanics Bank loan, and other challenges. And I just think I am very impressed by the thoughtfulness and the being strategic and looking ahead that's reflected in this budget. The way you met the challenges, the way you're thinking ahead. for example, the asset, the capital assets, you know, kind of the next few years and the long term too, how you figured out when you're going to have to, you know, invest to keep the ASR project working and things that are far out in the future. When I made such a long list of things that I liked about the budget that I was going to praise you for that. I'm not even going to say all of them because there are so many, but I like the fact that you put the mission and values of the district out there right in the beginning, and it's also reflected, you know, in other places, so that it's and I think that's important, and that's a really good thing to do for anyone who reads this, and people will read this. I mean, journalists could read this, judges could read this, historians maybe someday, who knows? No, really, and you know, they say, we've all heard people say that the budget, like talking about the national budget or the state budget, reflects our values, and that's true, but that's true at our level too.
Yeah.
And so I like that you considered that. It also brings out that you've had phenomenal success with obtaining grants, and that's, you know, we're reminded of that, which is great. And the other thing is, I have a bunch of questions, but the reason for my questions is basically the many gaps in my knowledge about the work of the district. And I realize that the staff, there's a lot of work the staff is doing that I'm only dimly aware of. And so most of my questions, you know, go to things that just little things that I don't understand, but they're not criticism type questions. I'll hold my questions maybe till other board
Okay.
members have a chance to make their comments and questions, because I've got maybe about half a dozen questions, but I'll come back with that later.
I'll turn to my left and see if Mayor Oglesby has any questions.
No. Just have one simple one. I thought the executive director did bring up the drought and flood and suggested it should be our deductible is $500,000. I don't, you know, I know the budget is balanced, but I don't know why we will wait to do it next year. You know, I don't think we'll have a claim this year, but it's just one of those things to tidy up. But I thought it was a well presented, and it seems like we covered everything except the sharpening the pencils and the information we'll get when it's a draft ready to vote on. But I don't have any suggestions about changing anything else.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Can we address that right now? Is there agreement that maybe we should just raise that to $500,000 to get it to our deductible? Because we can do that.
We can
I
do a
think we should
transfer.
do that personally.
Yeah, what'll happen is it'll protect us on the flood side. On the drought side, typically we use it for emergency outreach, or if we had to do emergency rationing, it'd be to hire a couple of people to help with the rationing process. So it's kind of a different outcome. On the flood side, it definitely would offset our deductible. On the drought side, it's offsetting budgetary items.
Is there general agreement that we should raise that to 500 now? Or no?
Yeah, it looked like there was, yeah.
I don't see a reason not to.
Okay, great, good. So we can go ahead and make that change. I don't think we have to have a motion in any of this. It's just advisory. Anything else, Ian?
No, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And now I will go. to
Thank you.
Mark.
So I just want to echo Director Paul's, not only her well-phrased observations and compliments about the budget, but this process. To echo something else, you know, we're all trying to catch up and understand what all of the staff members do here, and this budget is really quite instrumental in allowing that to happen, to have us understand it. I do have just sort of some budgeting questions, because this is not my forte. So, for example, on slide, oh boy, they're not numbered, are they? Not on the printout. Anyway, there was a set aside, obviously, because of the pending litigation regarding the yes, and a couple pages later, we've allocated, and we've talked about it actually today, $100,000 for the water allocation process. Maybe there might be an EIR. I suppose that's why we have it as high as we did. So those are two examples of putting money aside, budgeting for it, but then maybe we'll get relief on appeal, right? Maybe we won't need to do an EIR for the water. So what happens when we've set aside in the budget for, a reserve or an amount, an allocation for a certain amount, and then we don't need it for that purpose?
So in January, February timeframe, we do a mid-year budget adjustment. So if it's known that you don't need it, it'll get taken out of the system at that point in time, as if you never budgeted it.
Okay, so it won't show up as a surplus at the end of the year. It just gets removed from the budget.
Well, oftentimes we have projects that don't move forward as quickly as we thought, and they get carried over. And so the unexpended monies get carried over as like a surplus. So,
And it's all done in public, and
Yeah.
it's done with the board's
Great.
agreement.
Okay,
Um, last year we had a budgeted item for helping out. We thought maybe we could help Seaside with its new municipal well, like build it, use it as a Cal-Am well for a year, then turn it over to Seaside, that kind of thing. That project died, so that became found revenues. But it all depends on timing. If you know where it's going before mid-year budget, it'll find its way in there. Otherwise, it's
Yeah, and just,
end of the year.
just to point it out that the water supply charge revenue reserve fund will probably be most likely carried over for about 2 years, because the appeal process will take about 2 years. So it'll be about 2 budget cycles before we find out what happens with the appeal process.
And if there is a refund program, it's going to have to come to this building. We're going to have to run the refunding, because the assessor, tax collector is not going to be in a position to just go back out and issue refunds. And you need to demonstrate that you are the payer. So, you sell a property, if it's on your tax roll, the next guy shouldn't get the refund. It should be the original payer. And so we're going to have to manage that process if there is a
Let's
refund.
hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just gonna say, so we'll probably see that for the next 3 budget cycles.
Yeah, I think so.
So too. Sorry, just real quick, this slide, the 400,000 expended legal fees, projected legal fees for 23-24 for Measure J. Does anybody think that's low? I think, I'm
could be.
very worried that that's low.
Well, there's still some carryover. So we've authorized 60,000 of what we call phase 4. So phase 1 was the feasibility study. Phase 2 was the LAFCO process. Phase 3 was getting you through the appraisal. And phase 4 now is the findings, the hearing of public necessity, and the filing of a condemnation proceeding. And that kind of stops there. So we've only budgeted up through that point. We've got some budget left that will carry over, because Rutan and Tucker are not a phase-by-phase authorization. They're a lot like district council. It's just they're ongoing. So there's money already in there, and then there's some money that Reftelis has been using from phase 3 that will cover some of their activities. So for example, we have we did the authorization for the rate study work that will be presented to you in June. But they're also dealing with some of the findings and so forth. So that 400, I think, might be low, but what we've been trying to do is not predict the next step, because there's discretionary actions that you have to take. And so I can't today say that you're going to vote to do a condemnation proceeding. And I don't think you should say that you're going to do a condemnation proceeding. You may decide you don't want to. So we kind of only get you as far as the next set of actions.
Yeah. I get that.
Yeah.
My response to that, though, is it's all tea leaves when we're trying to project an expense.
Yeah.
I think we should budget for more, personally. That's my thought. I like the transparency about it. And I like, just like the $100,000, if we don't do an EIR for allocation, it's found
Yep.
money. Of course, if the appeal goes our way, then it's, we can all be pleasantly surprised and feel good about that. And I do think that, sure, we have a decision to make and we haven't made it yet. But, there's been, it's a real possibility. And so even if it doesn't happen, if it does happen, it's going to happen this fiscal year.
Well, I think there's a realistic chance that just getting to the filing of the decision to file and the filing could be more than 400,000. I mean, I know I'm late with the findings, but there's a lot of review of the findings and everybody's eyes are going to be on it.
Oh, yeah.
Now he's got his budget for general legal services. Where are we handling his specific to Measure J? Is that
It's in the 400,000.
it's in this 400,000 for Measure J?
So-
Yeah,
So actually, we've got $1 million put aside.
No, his is included in the 400,000.
just for Measure J. So we do, but I could see where it may be a couple 100,000 short.
My recommendation is we up it. I just feel like, I'm looking at Director Edwards because he's my teacher, because he's teaching me about how important it is to trust transparency about a lot of things. And this particular issue is one that's getting voice in the public. Quote, how much is this going to cost?
Right.
So let's budget for pedal to the metal, even if it may happen. We decide not to approve the filing of it. But I think you can't ignore the fact that if we do approve, and it hasn't been decided yet, that this ain't gonna cut it. And so that's my thought.
Through the chair, though, I support that, but I'm just saying we don't need to discuss why. If you guys want to put more money in there, just jump it in the Measure J fund, but let's get away from, in case we make a decision. In case we just.
So Suresh, what was our position on balancing? So if we add 170,000 to the flood drought, what's our play?
We've got about 300,000 to play with, or 350, I believe. So
So why don't we
170.
put 200 in on top of the Measure J legal expenses?
Yeah, we
Because it
can,
will be intense.
we can do 200,000 on the Measure J, but for the flood drought, what we can do is we can just do a transfer from the general operating reserve to flood drought reserve. So basically, that's just a
I
transfer.
was going to say,
Okay, all right.
would another option be to, similar, but just add money to the litigation insurance reserve? Does that make?
We've tried to keep Measure J separate, just because it's for a variety of reasons, some of which I've already identified, which is we don't budget for things past what we know we're doing. We do pull it. We typically pulled that money from the operating reserve and said, okay, here's the next phase. We need to now make a decision. And it goes back to discretionary actions and, none of you have made a decision that binds you on a vote for public necessity or anything. So we just want to kind of keep it. The good news is you saw the reserve report. We'll have 18 million.
About 18, correct.
So we've got room. So I think it is better to, if you, just as you said, if you feel like it's too low, put it up a little bit, but call it what it is. It's Measure J, and yeah.
So how much more are you suggesting? Another two to make it?
I think
600?
another two. Because I'm looking at the timeline.
What do you
You're
think
gonna-
of that?
If you want to move forward, you've got two closed sessions, one in June to look at financial impacts, one in July to look at findings. After that one, you'll decide whether you want to have a hearing or not. And then you're going to take an action probably September-ish. So even the amount of time that we have, our attorneys can't spend all of it in that short amount of time, can they?
You couldn't even say that with a straight face, okay? That's true. You know, this got a lot of lawyer jokes that just came up for me. Sort of feeling traumatized, but no, I mean, even 600 might be low, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do that then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would it look better if we made it another, like 300, 350, so that it's 750? Or do you want to?
Experience? So Rutan and Tucker, we budgeted for them and they have stayed under their budget to date. But I know that I think my bigger concern is how much do we have for Reftelis, because we want them to read all the findings
Right.
and then comment back to Rutan and Tucker. So we may not have enough money in their contract. I think we have enough on the legal side.
That's the response to that comment.
That's the, what is it, the truth finder there? No, I do think we have enough.
All right, yeah, that's fine.
But we're gonna
So what do you want to do here? Are
go
we
to
going to go up
600.
to 600? Okay, so we'll make that change
I
then as well.
appreciate that. And then one last, just the very last thing on this one here, this slide here.
Commitments.
Towards the very, very end. So future obligations. So I'm just struggling a little bit with this. Are none of these coming down or being addressed at all, even in small percentage amounts in the current budget? And well, let me ask that question.
Yeah, Suresh,
Yeah, it is.
OPEB and pension.
The pension obligation and OPEB obligation. So if you look at the current budget, and for the last 4 or 5 years, we have been setting aside 100,000 each year.
That's all I need to know.
And so that's
As long as it's in the budget in a small amount, I understand that now. Okay, thank you so much.
You're
And
welcome.
just so you also know, the pension obligation is getting more in control as our staff shifts more to post-PEPRA employees. So remember Brown revised the whole pension thing. And so they cover themselves a lot better than the
The
legacy.
pre-2013s.
Understood. And so that's getting better. The OPEB is getting worse as we get more retirees.
Well, and it'll actually, the calculation on the OPEB is basically taking into both the tier 1 and tier 2 employees. So basically, when Governor Brown had the PEPRA reform, what we also did was on the MOU negotiations, we created 2 different tiers of employees. So anybody hired after January 2013 came on second tier. So they get the lower medical benefits as opposed to tier
All of
1
it.
employees. So yeah, so that's going to help as well, but it's going to be in the outer years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abby, do you have any questions?
Not this time.
Okay. I'm gonna hold on Karen still, or to George.
Yeah, I'm going to raise an issue that I've raised before. And I think this is a classic year when it's more important than it was in prior years. And that is where there is a major change in the picture of the budget. You need a separate explanation about why that exists. Now, we know what it is because you've got the reserve that's more doubled or tripled. You've got the gross budget, the reserve account is just huge. And in order to avoid some criticism of bloated budget, I think it's stretching. I don't know, between the two of you, I think you need to be aware that the public image of what our budget looks like, and it goes back to Mark's comment as well. We know we're pushing the metal on Measure J. We know we're doing that.
Mhm.
But if we don't show anything in the budget to indicate that, yes, we are doing that, then it looks like we're fooling the budget, fooling the public, or not being fully open with where we're going. So Dave, whether we have a committed contract for some expense this year or not, we should anticipate some additional expenses. And based on the comments that have been made, and transparency is an issue, and the budget itself is going to call attention to itself without some explanations. I think we ought to make sure that there are some explanations in here very clearly up front where the PR part resides, which is in this opening statement. That why is it as big as it is? And some explanation of why it's temporary or whatever, but I'm not arguing about what the reasons are.
No, I get you.
Okay, it's just kind of pointing it out.
Yeah, I think there's four key areas. Well, I just wrote down bloat, but What that really means is the pass-throughs.
The pass-throughs, we
Yeah.
can hear amount,
That's a big number.
and then of course.
The purchase water costs, the increase in the operating reserve, because we're still building that. And then Measure J, yeah, the grant pass-through, so,
Part of it.
yeah, compared to the others, yeah.
Some of these are literally, you call them passive, but another way to call it is fully reimbursable expenses. I mean, that could be the thing to put up in the front. You know, I think George is addressing that in the budget, included in the budget are over probably 30, roughly $30 million.
yeah,
whatever the number is. Yeah, we'll get-
Fully reimbursable expenses, but just lop that off, you know?
So should we do that in the transmittal letter?
Yeah, I think.
Which is like the budget summary,
right now,
essentially the
Or in the 2-page summary of.
Yeah, it'll actually make it to the transmittal part of it. We
In the
can
trans-
basically
yeah.
have a section on reimbursements and just say,
Yeah,
One
one of the significant changes in the letter,
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the things that caught my attention in the slideshow.
It's a good point, George.
Number. If you look at what you put in the operating reserve ending balance is projected to be 81% of, here it is, the operating budget, right? It's the operating budget. It's not the full 48 million.
correct.
And what, you know, and that really got our attention.
Mhm.
Oh, it's the real expenses that aren't fully reimbursed, and then we have the revenue, and so,
I had the same problem with the 86% from figuring it out.
yeah, it's the real budget, not the pass-through or the fully reimbursable stuff. I get why it's in budget. So, but this, I think, is another way that sort of, so one way we
So
can.
next time he says he's not a real money guy. we know.
He is, right?
A real numbers guy.
In addition to $30 million. That's like the cream on the cappuccino. Take that off. Now we have this other thing, the operating budget. Like, that's what it is, and that's not loaded. And that kind of.
But transmittal letters, okay.
I think that's,
Yeah,
that
'cause
makes
that'll
sense
be-
to me. That's the
your
official,
most Upfront,
yeah,
and we can
Yeah.
give it a section heading.
another paragraph
Significant
that's
changes.
specifically, yeah, I think that would do well. And then just make sure the summary is changed as well. I think that would do well.
I do think the issue of reimbursable accounts, grants and so on does distort the picture
Oh, yeah.
for the operating, the same comments that were made. And I wish there was some way, and I've often wondered what would it look like? But to show the reimbursable expenses, not as an accounting system, but as a picture presentation about how much of that is reimbursable. Identify the sources, because so we're really a spider in where we're getting money from. I mean, we're everywhere. I mean, I'm pleased at that. But why not promote a little bit more about how well we get grants, how many grants we get, and then show it in a way that the public can appreciate what it is that we're doing that's not on their bill. And I just think there's a way to present it as a picture, but not as a counting system. And I mean, unless there is a way of doing that, that's not what I'm asking about though.
Some of the reimbursement is on their bill. The CalAm.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, but that's just an example, and he went too far with the example. But I'm getting to the picture and telling the story,
Mhm.
right? I thought we did good by, hey, if we account for the $30 million, that's a huge weight from 48.
Mhm.
So we're really just working on your behalf with 18,
Mhm.
right? What does that look like?
Yeah.
You know, I don't-
This was I'm really glad that we had this discussion. I thank you very much for bringing it forward, George. I think we all feel that more than anything. We want to make sure that we are totally transparent to the public. Plus, we have a good story to tell. And I think what we have discussed now will really do it, I think, be helpful.
And keep in mind too, that some of the story, you don't want to tell the whole story, because when you say, we got a Bureau of Reclamation grant, well, yeah, that means it came from the income taxes paid by the good people of Alabama to Alaska. It's like, we appreciate that, but then again, there's somebody else getting a grant in Montana at the same time. And so, the money comes from somewhere. It's not completely free money. But if you dwell too much on the story, it's.
But you say
It's tough.
federal or say state, I don't
Yeah.
care whether you.
Yeah.
You too.
It just shows how active the staff has been in being able to, to get these grants. I think that's something to
Well,
be
and-
very proud of.
And we are proud of it because somebody's going to get that money.
Yeah.
And so
Why not us?
Bring it here home. Yeah.
And it shows that those entities think these are good projects.
Mhm.
And I think if the story or that data is lost, then I feel I'm providing more of that 18 million than what I am, or the 48. It makes sense, right? We all think it comes from within the district unless you tell us we worked hard to get the grants. Okay. All right.
And I just want to call your attention to. Just call your attention to page 69. I think there's a. circle
Okay,
between some
trying to
there on
get
the
this
stamp.
group of cats back in order here.
The far right change column, 69 here. It's 33. It's tempted on my page, or it's 69 in the agenda packet.
On the PDF page.
The PDF page 69.
Are those questions, George, that you have that we're trying to follow?
I just want David to follow this one.
Oh, okay. Do you have anything that the rest of us should be joining in with
Which
you?
division is that?
Water resources.
Okay.
Just check the numbers, that's all.
I have a question related to reimbursable expenses while we're on that subject.
Okay. Actually, Alvin, did you have a chance to ask questions?
Market hit, basically, we need to raise like legal fees and stuff. We need to act like we're gonna move forward. And when we raise the budget and stuff, I feel that people will start noticing that we are moving forward. I have to tell them why, but we put it in the budget. One of my concerns are some of the expenditures like design, construction channel and quarantine tanks. We have done that already, right?
It's still ongoing, hasn't closed out yet. So carry over.
Still carrying over. I like to see us put a list out. What is carried over, what's been budgeted for, but we're carrying it over so we can see it. So we can do that. And a list of basic projects that we're gonna be doing. I think we got some with Pure Water Monterey that you talked about doing.
Yeah, we do have a project list. It's not exactly user-friendly because it's disaggregated into a bunch of different categories, but you can see what's going on pretty much by division. And you see the reimbursement monies, but it's not at a high level. I mean, it's the detail.
Well, it's a level that the board can see and that the public can see. This is what we're doing. This is what that money is moving for. This money is continuation. So when I talk about Sleepy Hollow, y'all can tell me, okay, it's continued work, because I feel after we threw that 100,000 in there, that they should have cleaned up a whole lot. And there shouldn't be that much work out there to do besides maintain the place, so.
But the allocated amount for that particular line item should have been a lot lower than before, right?
Yeah, it is actually, the total project cost was like 759,000 or something. This is the 126, is just a residual of that.
That's all I got. All good comments. We need the public to move forward. They can see that by the amount of money we're having.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments before I go back to Karen and let her kind of wrap up with her questions? Anything else, George?
I'm sorry. go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to add, just so we're always clear and always protecting ourselves, so we're prepared to move forward.
Yes.
We may not move forward. I mean, we just have to
Yeah.
but we're prepared, so we can put as much as we want, but we
Our
don't know. what
bags
we're
are
gonna
packed, but we may not go.
do. That's right. That's right.
Okay, Karen, you said you had a number of questions.
Well said. Yes. So one is about the reimbursable expenses. So I'm looking at the chart on the environmental projects. So this is page 42 of the hard copy, or page 16 of the budget, draft budget. So this is a chart that shows project expenditures for protecting environmental quality, riparian mitigation, all the fish, and so on. And I'm looking, and I thought pretty much everything on this page I thought was reimbursable by someone, but that's not what I'm seeing so I'm confused.
No, none of these are reimbursable. These are basically the riparian work is basically district funded, meaning it's used from the user fees. So basically using the district revenues to fund for these projects, not reimbursed by, external parties.
So maybe I was just confused. I thought that Cal Am was reimbursing the district for some of these Carmel River.
Right. So it was always a district initiated program. It started with a 5-year plan that then ultimately was renewed during the budget cycle. And then when Order 9510 came out, the state water board basically said, we think that these environmental programs are working, and therefore if the district should ever choose not to fund it, Cal-Am, you must step in and fund it. So it became a contingent obligation of Cal-Am, but we never let it go. But then when the user fee was taken off of the bill, we appealed to the same administrative law judge and said, hey, wait a minute, we've got this contingent obligation, but we will continue to do the work. And so she instructed Cal-Am and the district to do basically a contract, bare bones contract, because they thought it would be resolved in short time. And so it didn't include a lot of vehicles, it didn't include a lot of, it didn't include any inflation. And then this thing persisted for a number of years. But at that point in time, so you lost the user fee on the Cal-Am bill, and then immediately a lesser charge, the Carmel River mitigation fee, was put on the bill. So it looked like there was a surcharge on the Cal-Am bill paying for mitigation, which there was. But then ultimately the Supreme Court determined our user fee was for our governmental purposes, not unlike a utility user tax.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore goes to cover programs of the districts that are separate from Cal-Am and not redundant. And so the fact that we're collecting a portion of our revenues as a fee on the bill is not a reimbursement nor a subsidy. It's just a collection mechanism, just like we collect the water supply charge on the assessor's bill. And so when you look at if you live in Monterey, you will see a utility user tax for the city of Monterey, and that's different than their franchise fee. And so we look at our user fee like a utility user tax, which is just a form of collection. So it's our revenue paid by Cal-Am ratepayers, passed through by Cal-Am to us, but it's really a district revenue. So it's not a reimbursement.
Not a reimbursement. Okay. I guess I didn't realize the distinction. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
One thing I noticed, and I'm not sure what page I saw this, but the cost of electricity for I think it's the Pure Water Monterey, was something like $500,000 a year, which it's now, I mean, the project requires energy, but it's so much that has any thought been given to possible ways to reduce that expense in the future? I don't know if it's probably pretty energy efficient already the way it was designed,
So
but
what electricity do we have in?
Yeah, so that's on page 41. It's the ASR phase
So
one.
ASR.
That's the one reimbursed by Cal-Am ratepayers, $500,000. And it's got the VFD, the frequent, the
variable frequency.
variable
drive.
frequent drives, and all that stuff. So they've looked at that. They've also looked at the rate mechanism with PG&E in terms of the time of day usage and stuff like that. But because the demand is so high on that, when that goes on, they
Yeah,
have
we
to
actually,
put
I
us on.
think you were away, but I talked to somebody who's contracted to PG&E to try to push people into the time of day pricing.
Mhm.
I said, we simply can't. We're running
How are we going to
the
do
well
this?
24/7 when we're injecting. So there's an electricity component to Pure Water Monterey that's not reflected in our budget, but it's in that purchase water cost. And they will be converting to a microgrid and increase use of the landfill gas in about 2 years. So our projections show that that'll be it's actually a contractual discount to the PG&E rate. So we'll be better than PG&E in the purchase water cost. On ASR, we've had a couple of inquiries about solar on the site. The site's not really conducive. It's not enough square footage. And I think we would likely have problems with the city because of, it's at eye level. It's not really out of sight.
Mm.
And eventually that piece on this side of the blue line is still slated for either commercial or residential. I think the original transition from Fora had potential for some housing units, and then right at the corner of Euclid and General Gym was some low-scale commercial and so forth. So we can't really get away with, solar farm there. We've looked at this building as well, but yeah, time of day pricing doesn't work. Solar doesn't work at that site. So we're kind of stuck there.
Okay. Thank you.
You guys have sent that bug slowly from that side of the table. I saw it here and it just got me. Go to Dave.
I think he just caught it.
Okay, I think those are the only questions I think we need to, I need to bring up right now. I just have a note to myself to mention again the long-term planning that's reflected in the capital asset replacement schedule. And just thank you again for being so responsible, make sure we have adequate reserves of water for the Pure Water Monterey, adequate financial reserves for everything. I just want to express my appreciation for how well, what a really good job you've done on this.
Thank you. If there are no more questions or comments, I'll take it out to the public and see if there's any member of the public that would like to make comment tonight.
Chair Adams, I see no raised hands.
Well, isn't that something? So with that,
Chair, if I may, so this budget is telling me that Pure Water Monterey expansion will be done.
Not
What-
during this budget cycle,
No,
but
no,
yes.
but
Yeah.
we're moving forward.
Yep.
With the 3.4 that water supply charge in court, we still are able to do what we need to do for Pure Water Monterey expansion and Pure Water.
That is true. The board did adopt a policy probably 4 years ago now, where the goal, the hoped for goal, was to continue to collect the water supply charge until you had fully repaid other funds that had been expended on water supply projects. So we're not going to be able to do that, obviously, or we might if we win it on appeal. But the lucky thing, if you want to call it luck, is we're now funding the loan for construction. So our reaching into our pockets for 75 cents on every dollar of pre-construction costs is about to end. So the project will now be paid for through the WIFIA loan, just like the base project. Once we've pulled down the state revolving fund loan, then we didn't have to reach into our pocket to pay for costs. So it's a good thing.
The next article of going out to the public, I like it to say, if the board is okay, that we are able to move ahead and don't worry about too much about that water supply charge.
Yeah, because I think one of the newspaper reports said, oh, during this critical time.
Yes, and other people think that it's gonna stop, so,
Yeah.
I'd just like you to verbalize that for us, for me, and for the board if they want it, so.
Okay, we have
thank you.
one more. It looks like everybody's got one last one. Karen and then George.
Are there any staff vacancies that you anticipate filling in the coming fiscal year?
Well, one of the reasons personnel went down is we removed the on-staff public outreach person because Wellman Ed is working out. So that consultant contract is in my budget and it didn't exceed last year. So that's a good point. We're now seriously thinking about a utility analyst because of some of these. I think at the last water supply planning, we mentioned that we're now an urban water supplier. We're a wholesaler, but we're an urban water supplier. And we have certain reporting obligations. We're still sorting through what all the obligations are, but it looks like we're going to have things that we don't have a person for right now. So we are carrying that position.
It is budgeted.
In the budget, and we might actually go out mid-year and get somebody. And then based on which way the breeze is blowing about your general manager's retirement date, we'll want to get somebody in here with at least a year left to kind of cross over. If that's your choice, you may decide you want to just do a search and do, get somebody else. But we had such positive conversations about the status of the CDO and what has to be proven out. And that's 2 years out. So I don't think that's a this budget year issue. So.
Okay, thank you,
Well,
George.
One other question, the 13 or 15 million that's in the budget for Monterey expansion, Monterey pure water expansion. Is that a multi-year revenue stream or is that just for this year?
We're hoping it's this year because the 4.8 million in the governor's budget, we are told is secure. Our contact who's handling that one doesn't have a funding agreement for us yet. The 11 million through the Department of Water Resources, we do have a funding agreement, and we're going to try to apply it as quickly as possible in reimbursements for the project. The problem is Monterey One Water has also got a $15 million grant from the state revolving fund and a $10 million, 10.3 from the Bureau of Reclamation. So there's going to be a little competition as to which dollars get reimbursed by which source first.
How about 75-25?
But it also depends, for example, on the governor's earmark, that was for extraction well number 6. I'm sorry, injection well number 6. The idea being, if we had more injection capacity, we could build a drought reserve. So get us one more well. So that's very specific. So that one's going to track with invoices. The other 3 will just be, how do the invoices fall and which ones can get.
It's more of a hope for 1 year deal,
Yeah,
but
hope
okay,
for.
okay.
But we know it's at least 2 because it's no more than 2 because it's a 2-year build and the award will be July. So that's almost the beginning of the fiscal year.
Okay. Yes.
Through the chair, Dave, did you say the succession planning for the general manager's position is in the budget?
No, it's not.
Yeah, that was it. That's why
Yeah.
we have to think about that. We have to plan on that. And I think we're cutting our nose off to spite our face. However, that's said, if we sit up here and think that knowledge can just be downloaded in 6 months, 8 months, whoever comes behind, whenever he leaves, and I'm not pushing him out in the next budget cycle, but
We are putting our head in the sand. We are putting our head in the sand.
Yeah, we're putting ahead because the new person has to sit here and see how you guys understand the answers to these questions and how you like them to be answered in that vein for a smooth transfer over. And that's well worth the cost of him sitting and learning from Mr. Stoltz as long as he can.
Well, we should have that discussion at some point because
Mm.
we've talked about, there are some things that I do as a GM that other GMs wouldn't do. And previous GMs would not have been capable of doing. And that's, but as he tried to point out to me this morning, that's what makes it fun. But but there's broader things we need to talk about. I mean, there's some health related things that if I don't improve, what I call, if I don't get into fighting shape on my own, then I've got to make some changes. And but the lifting of the CDO, which I cavalierly said, oh, that should be less than 5 years. I can do that. When I took this job 12 years ago, that is actually within sight. And Measure J is, it needs to get to a certain place before, there's things you cannot hand off easily, but we should have, we should have a conversation at some point.
Well, I'm just to the board, I'm not putting my hand in. I'm not talking about him going anywhere.
Yeah.
But he has to have an understudy, and it's not, well, all these things are accomplished and I'll give you guys 6 months. I'm just saying that knowledge is not transferable from executive director in 4 or 5 months. And so, we want him to, on a personal level, take care of his health and all of that stuff. But as an organization, I'm listening to the knowledge, and we need that when he goes and he wants to do what he wants to do. That's all I want you guys to think about. It's worth the cost.
Good. That's important.
I don't know if it's a budget item for 23, 24, but you would let us know it, especially if it's not 5 to 6 months, but a year.
Yeah, my plan was to let you know when I had a date certain so that you could hire somebody a year before that date certain so that we could overlap for an extended period of time. But there's 2 risks with that. One is then you're getting somebody who wants to be the understudy for a while. Or then if the GM says, well, wait a minute, I'll stay another 6 months to a year. And then you have somebody who's like, hey, wait a minute, you promised you were get out of the way, man.
There are things called contractual agreements.
Yeah, so you can make it work. But you may also decide, and there was a great conversation at our last board meeting, how, the faces of GMs are represented by old white males, right? And yeah, but there may be something where you want to do a search and get the right kind of person that, and that may not happen if you decide that you're going to hire the subsequent GM in training at that level, and then that person's supposed to excel, and then go to the next level. So there's a lot to think about.
We're pushing the budget discussion.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think you are. At
It
least,
is not in the budget.
We're talking about
You
putting
will
money
get
in the
enough
budget.
warning.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
It could be a budget issue if you're saying
right.
that a search can take 6 months, then whoever she is that comes in.
Yeah. Pandering.
If she comes in and then she has another 12 months, now that's 18 months. So if you're thinking 2 years, it is a budget. Because of the search, 6 months could take just to get somebody in. That's all. I appreciate you. It's no pressure.
yeah.
Madam
You
Chair,
have to make a decision, but we have to, it's just.
just one more. Do we have employee contracts this coming budget? Or that in? the next
Yeah,
one?
March.
Yeah.
One more year.
So they'll come in March to negotiate for July 1 of 2024.
2024.
Okay, so we don't have to put money in there for them.
Right.
This one, okay, just
Yep.
want to make sure that they know we're looking out for them. All right, thank you, that's all.
Thank you very much. I'm closing the discussion. We've already gone out to the public. And now we do not need to take a vote on this. We have recommended action was to review the proposed budget. We've done that. And I think we've given some good direction to staff. And let's go just check a couple of dates. We'll be seeing this again on June 20th, Tuesday, June 20th at 6 o'clock. There'll be no closed session that night here. And then we also have a meeting on Friday, June 16th at 1 o'clock. And that is to have a closed session item that will deal with real property negotiations. So, and that is also going to be here in this room. So with that, I will thank everyone for all of the wonderful work tonight. And I love it that the approach to budgeting is very liberal on the expense and very conservative on the revenue. Works out well that way. So thank you so much. And the meeting is adjourned.